Well, here we go. Moments ago, I filmed this entire video and I thought it went really good, and I didn't hit record. So that won't be the first time that happens, and it probably won't be the last, unfortunately. But we're going to try and do this again. So I think this is an important video based on my understanding of what triggers the buck's rut. So I'm going to try and explain this the best I can, and I think I can do a pretty good job of it. But we know through radio collared studies, through fetus studies of fawns, observing when fawns are born and then going back the 200-day gestation period, we know that every single year, give or take a day or two on either side, the peak of the rut is always the same. So in my area, that's November 15th. Maybe the 14th, right in there, is the peak breeding. You have to look that up for your area. But it's the same every single year. So if you kind of take a 10-day window on either side of that peak day, and a lot of does are getting bred. 60%, 65%. So again, for me, maybe November 10th to November 20th, there's a big bunch of does that are getting bred. So up until that point, you got some does coming in heat, some more does coming in heat, this big chunk around peak breeding, and then some afterwards, and it creates this bell curve. And that repeats itself year after year after year, regardless of moon and weather and snow. And when I was a kid, when I was a little kid, 12, 13, 14, I was trying to predict the rut. And I always thought that it probably had something to do when all the leaves fell off the trees, because that's when I saw the most bucks. And it probably actually did, looking back on it. But we know today it's based on the amount of sunlight triggers that doe coming in heat. Now, with hundreds or even thousands of does being sampled, that science is accurate. Year after year, it just repeats itself. Where it gets confusing, or what hunters need to understand, is we aren't looking at 1,000 does being sampled. We might hunt a 40 or an 80 acre piece, or maybe an 80 acre piece over here, and then we got a different farm we can hunt over here, or maybe a couple different pieces of public ground. And in any one of those areas, we might only have 4 or 5 does in that area that call that 40, or that area that's in their home range. Maybe on the other piece, there's a handful of does. So in a buck's home range, depending on which area you're hunting, if that buck's home range is 800 acres or 1,000 acres, there might be 4 does in that area. There might be 10 does in that area, but it's not 100 or 1,000. So what happens is every year the bucks are ready to breed in September. They're ready to breed in October. Their testosterone levels are increasing, but they remain on a bed to feed pattern. Even though that bed to feed pattern might kind of expand a little bit, they might leave their beds a little bit earlier every day on average, going into October on their evening feeding cycle. In the morning, they might be getting back to their bedding area a little bit later as the season goes on. Maybe they move around a little bit more during the daytime. So every day, a buck's movement is getting more and more and more. Their home range, or the amount of their home range they use, might be getting more and more and more throughout October. But there's a step change. And there's a step change of when that buck gets triggered, when the buck starts his rut on any given parcel of land or farm. And that is when that first doe in their home range, when he smells that first estrus doe, that's what triggers that buck's rut. So kind of going back, on a macro level, that's thousands of deer, it's this bell curve. So we know, well, peak breeding is always middle of November. But on your specific piece of property that you're hunting, peak breeding might be early November. Might be late November. It might very well be the middle of November. There might be a doe that comes in early, let's say October 25th. That triggers that buck's rut, or all the bucks in that area that can smell that doe, that triggers them. So their rut starts in late October. A different farm 10 miles away, maybe your buddy's hunting a different farm 10 miles away, your rut starts October 25th, because that's when the first hot doe triggered that buck, those bucks in that area, that their rut starts 10 miles away. The first doe might come into heat November 4th or November 11th. So you might look like you have an early rut. Oh, the rut's early this year. And your buddy might say, the rut, there's nothing going on here. I'm still seeing bucks traveling together. I'm still seeing bucks totally on a bed to feed pattern. What's going on? Well, they're both true. Both things are happening simultaneously, and it's because that doe, that first doe that comes in heat is what's triggering the buck's rut in your area. I used to be part of, there was 4 or 5 of us that hunted a 440 acre lease in Wisconsin. We had a state highway that went through the center of the lease, and very seldom would we see bucks on one half of the farm and see them on the other half of the farm with that state highway dividing it in half. Not that it never happened, but generally speaking, that was kind of a boundary for home ranges. And it happened all the time where half of a farm would just explode with buck activity, let's say November 1st. The other half of the farm, not so much. Nothing's going on. It might be November 11th before the other half of the farm explodes with buck activity. The following year, maybe they both explode with buck activity at the same time. The third year, the other half might come in early. This one might be 5 or 10 days later. And it happened like that over and over and over and over again. And this perfectly explains what's going on. It's when that doe comes in heat in that area that triggers those bucks when their rut starts. I have a couple links I'll either put it in the comments or the description from some studies that were done in, I believe it was Pennsylvania. It's really good stuff. I mean, there's so much stuff out there that kind of collaborates what I'm talking about right now, but I want to put a couple links in there and give them credit for this. It's a deer study group, I think, in Pennsylvania, but I'll put those links in there. And they show this exact thing. It's the does that really control when the bucks are moving. The does are in heat, the bucks are in rut. Not that they're not expanding their home ranges a little bit and they're doing more scraping and more rubbing, but this step change, this explosion in activity is dictated by the does coming into heat. I got a couple graphics that maybe can explain it a little bit. The first we'll get into here a little bit, but you can see these different lines reflect potential or hypothetical when the buck's rut starts and ends on that farm. So let's look at farm number 1. You can see the first hot doe, or the first doe that comes into heat is November 4th. The last doe is coming in heat early December. So on that farm, the buck's rut, the start and end, is the beginning of November, about 4 weeks long, to the beginning of December. It might trickle in a little bit after that or trickle out a little bit after that. I kind of see how it trickles at the end. I see that a lot where the last doe really is bred, let's say the end of November, and the bucks are still kind of geared up for that for maybe 5, 6, 7 days afterwards. They'll kind of switch back to a bed to feed area, but they're still checking for that last hot doe. You'll see an example, farm number 2. That farm, you're going to see an explosion of buck activity. So the bucks rut, they're going to expand their home range, just pow. They're going to start going on excursions. If they're the type of bucks that go on excursions, they're going to start doing it. They're going to start moving. Instead of 300 yards a day, maybe it's 1,000 yards a day. They're going to leave their beds an hour before or 2 hours before quitting time in the evening, as opposed to right at quitting time. When are they going to start that? Around the end of October. In this graphic, October 28th. Farm number 3 might be identical to farm number 2. Farm number 4, that's your buddy's farm. You're hunting on farm number 2 or 3. October 28th, boom. You're seeing all kinds of rutting activity. You're having great sits. Your buddy's a couple miles away. Nothing until November 11th. It's because when that first doe comes into heat, that's what triggers that. I just want to make one comment about farm number 6. Now, this is hypothetical, but I have seen cases like farm number 6. And it's usually cases where it's a huge overpopulation of deer in the area. Just 40, 50, 60 does on an alfalfa field, for example. I mean, it's just totally overpopulated, in my opinion. And in those areas, a lot of times you're going to see a really drawn out rut. The chances of having early does and peak breeding does and late does is so much greater because there are potentially hundreds of does in this buck's home range that are coming in heat. What that does is that means the buck's rut could be 12, 13, 14 weeks long where they're not eating, they're chasing, they're doing rut activities, and that's very stressful on those bucks. I think, I don't know what this is, I don't want to really get into this stuff, but a buck can lose 40%, 50% of their weight, maybe not 50%, but you can have a 260 pound live weight buck go down to 180 pounds live weight at the end of the rut. And it's very stressful. That's with a 4 or 5 week rut. Can you imagine a 12-week rut? So that's not really a good thing in my opinion. But you can see under that example, farm number 6, October 21st, a doe starts coming in heat. These bucks are geared up and they're going crazy now until the end of December. I don't actually think that's a good thing. I'd like to have a lot more condensed rut. I want to be able to hunt that bed to feed pattern, hunt the rut, and then go back to bed to feed. But that's my opinion. So you can see on these 7 different farms, those lines represent when the local buck herd, not a buck, but when the local buck herd kind of pops and goes into what I call the buck's rut. So I'm just going to use farm number 1 as an example and kind of explain how I hunt, how my strategy shifts throughout the year. So most of us, and not for me anymore. So to be honest, I can hunt every single day of the season now. I'm retired. I can hunt 60 days a year for bow season. I can hunt morning, I can hunt night. But up until a few years ago, I was a weekend hunter and a vacation hunter, just like most hunters out there. So when would I pick my vacation, or when would I hunt? Well, it was when I could, and then I would pick my vacation off of a calendar date, because I couldn't predict. I couldn't predict when that first doe would come into heat for this year, so I would pick a calendar date. So for me, it was always, I took as much time off as I could in November, which was the rut, right? That's when the does are coming in heat. And then I would take weekends in October, maybe a long weekend if I could. And what I would do is if I saw signs of that first hot doe coming in heat, so let's say it's October 25th, and a doe would pop and I would see it, or our cameras would light up and I would see it, that would be the time where I'd call in and be like, hey, can I get an extra 2 days off? I was going to take off Saturday and Sunday. I want Monday and Tuesday off as well. I want to extend my vacation. So I'm always watching for that first hot doe and then taking vacation or calling in sick. If that doe pops into heat and I know it, I know there's going to be a spike in activity and I want to be all over it. Now, if your schedule is a little more flexible, you have more hunting time, I want to get into what my strategy is today, knowing that I can hunt every single day. So from season opener until that first doe comes into heat, I'm all bed to feed. And I don't know when that doe is coming into heat. So I have to observe that. I have to see camera data, and we'll get into that. But I'm on a bed to feed pattern. So what does that mean? I'm hunting transition food plots, fence jumps, inside corners, ditch crossings, connected timbered points, etc., but all based on a bed to feed pattern. The feed pattern might change. They might be on alfalfa one day. Cornfield gets combined. Now they might be on cut corn for 3 days. Maybe early in the season they're eating white oak acorns or red oak acorns. But it's still that bed to feed pattern. I'm still hunting structure. I'm still hunting travel, if you want to call it corridors, but it's bed to feed. That's what I'm doing in the early part of the season. And I'm watching for that first hot doe, in my mind, that's going to trigger me that now I can start hunting my rut spots. So for me, how do I know what the doe comes in heat? Well, I observe it. So a doe comes in heat, there's 5 or 6 bucks on her. Maybe I even see breeding activity. Or for cameras, if you're getting 1 buck every couple days, maybe your average is 1 or 2 bucks a day, and all of a sudden, boom, now you're seeing 3 or 4 or 5 bucks a day on your cameras. And you see this explosion in activity. And it's not October 10th. If it's October 10th, there's probably something else going on. But you start getting into that later parts of October, early November, and you see this huge step change, either with your eyes or your cameras are really lighting up. That's evidence that the first hot doe has triggered the buck's rut. So in this example, bed to feed pattern, November 4th, doe comes in heat. So I'm going to switch immediately to rut when I see that sign, when I see symptoms of that first hot doe. And it's the same thing. I'm still hunting structure, still hunting ditch crossings and fence jumps, and you get the picture. But now I don't have to have that in combination with a bed to feed pattern. Downwind side of bedding is where I'll start hunting during the rut. So I'm looking for more cruising activity during this rut phase. And then at the end, when I see bucks kind of getting lazy, in this example, early December, maybe it's late November, I see bucks more on a bed to feed, so I see them out and cut corn or a soybean food plot. I mean, they're really not, there's does out there and they're not chasing them around and stuff like that. Now I know I'm on back to bed to feed. Still hunting structure, but it's a bed to feed pattern. I'm not hunting this rut type behavior. So I hope this makes sense on why the rut really doesn't change year to year, but yet it does. I hope that makes sense. And it does on a local level, because on a local level, the local does, when they're coming into heat, when they're first coming into heat, they're dictating the buck's rut. So the bucks might be ready for their rut for 3 months, but it's when the does that are in heat that are dictating when those bucks are really in their rutting activity and putting their miles on. The other thing, I'll end with this. You can be going along and having, a bed to feed type pattern and just not a lot of movement, and the bucks seem to be moving mostly at night, or they're not expanding their home range, and you're seeing the same 1 or 2 bucks over and over again on your cameras type of thing. Nothing's happening. That's typical, actually. That can literally change overnight. So you could be going along October 24th, October 25th, and nothing's going on, and literally overnight you can have this huge step change of buck activity completely overnight. All of a sudden, instead of getting a couple bucks on camera, you're getting a dozen bucks on camera. Or you're seeing just an explosion of chasing and stuff like that. That's a sign of that first doe coming in heat, and you should switch tactics immediately on that farm. Maybe on a different farm, maybe your target buck is still on a bed to feed pattern, and you can still kill that big buck on a bed to feed pattern on that farm. But on this farm, if that first doe came in heat, your chances of killing a buck on a bed to feed pattern just plummeted. You got to switch to rut type activities. So I hope this makes sense, and I hope you can use these like tactics and thoughts this fall and every fall going forward. Thanks for watching.